I request everyone to please be muted.
Doctors.
Fine. Am I audible? Can you all see me?
Yes,
Yes.
your slides are not visible at the moment.
I'll be sharing my slides. Don't worry. Can you see my slides also?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes,
It
sir.
is visible.
So as I said, I'll be talking about the COVID-19, the current scenario, and the empowerment of the basic physician to manage the patients at home. In the last 1 month, we have seen the second wave, and this has been the cruelest month of all the times. All across the world, India has seen the worst scenario in the COVID. In April only, we have seen nearly 70 lakh cases, which is much more than the previous 6 months record of nearly 60 lakh cases. And not only this number, this is the highest number of monthly cases anywhere in the world. And not only that, we have witnessed more than 48,000 people dying of this cruel disease. So it is very important that every physician tries to understand the basic, how can we save life. We have been going through this journey of coronavirus for last 1 year. In last 1 year, we have learned about the pathogenesis of COVID infection, what are the various target organs, various complications. We have learned new things about the RT-PCR, the CT value, and the transmission. We are now clear that the coronavirus does not follow any seasonal pattern. We also know that the virus does not survive on the various surfaces equal number of time. We know that on the porous surfaces like the paper and the cloth, the virus survives only few hours, while on the steel and the plastic, it may survive 2 to 3 days. We also know that the virus has the droplet transmission, direct transmission, and the airborne transmission. Unfortunately, there has not been much progress in the antiviral front, but we have the better understanding on the anti-inflammatory treatment, and we have more clarity on the anticoagulants and the antithrombotic therapy. Now, overall, we appear to be wiser. The clinical presentation of the second wave, the clinical presentation nearly remains the same. The complications are also the same. And the another thing which has been added to our armamentarium is the vaccine. What is the difference between the first wave and the second wave? In second wave, we are finding that the younger people are getting infected, and the entire family of 4 people, 5 people, one after the other at one time, they are all getting affected. And there have been cases of infection after the completion of 2 doses of vaccine, and there have been many cases even after the 1 dose of vaccination. Now, this is a very, very important slide. You should all try to focus on this slide, because this slide tells you the symptomatology of this infection. It is very, very important that whenever you see a patient, you should inquire about the first day of illness. The first day when the patient started having malaise, it may be fever, it may be cough, it may be any symptom, and maybe even diarrhea. The first day the symptoms start, you start counting the number of days, and it is on the 7th day that the patient, they start suddenly deteriorating. They might start having shortness of breath, and they may go into the ARDS and may require the admission in the hospital and in the ICU. This first phase of 7 days is called as the virus replication phase, and second phase becomes the phase of inflammation, and so on. So this is very important that whenever you treat a patient, you first inquire about the first day of illness, because this is the first day onwards we count the number of days, and it is also important for the treatment point of view, because on from this day we find out when the steroids are to be started or not to be started. We also know that the patients who are older in age and those who have the comorbidities, they have the poor outcome. But in the second wave, we are witnessing that even the younger people are succumbing to the disease. What are the predictors of the poor prognosis? Which are the patients to whom we should be much more careful? Male patients, the coronavirus is cruel to males and kind to women. The old age people, they are much more likely to be having higher mortality. Those who have been smoking, people with the obesity, people with the diabetes, high blood pressure, ischemic heart disease. Why is it that these people they have the higher morbidity and the higher mortality? Because we all know that this is a disease which causes endotheliitis. It affects the endothelium of the vessels. And these patients of obesity, diabetes, hypertension, and ischemic heart disease, those who are smoking, they already have the underlying endothelial dysfunction. So they become much more prone to the onslaught given by the virus. But it is also important to know that it's not that all the patients who have the comorbidities are likely to die. They are to be strictly and carefully followed. This is the slide which shows that this is the slide which shows that as the age advances, the mortality advances. The the blue part of the bar chart shows the younger generation and the the as the age advances. Blue part shows the people who have lived, and as the age advances, we find that more of older people succumb to the disease. We are much more aware about the pathophysiology of the disease. We know that this is a disease which is not an infective disease. The virus causes the infection, but the basic pathophysiology of the disease involves either inflammation caused by the virus or the thrombosis caused by the virus. I just show you some of the slides which have been taken from the lung parenchyma, and you can see a huge number of inflammatory cells all across the lung parenchyma. All these dark blue small cells, you can see that they are lymphocytes and the other innate immunity cells. And you can see here over there that there are thrombosed capillaries of the lung parenchyma. So disease causes inflammation and disease causes thrombosis. And this very picture forms the basis of the entire treatment of the disease. Initially, there is inflammation, and along with the inflammation, there is thrombosis of the vessels. And if we give these anti-inflammatory drugs and the anti-thrombotic drugs, we might, to some extent, be able to conquer the disease in more than 80% of the population. This is the HRCT. HRCT, you all know, must have seen number of HRCTs. This is the peripheral ground glass opacities. You can see that the periphery of the lung is involved. Central areas, they remain normal. This is the normal tissue, and this is the ground glass opacity, which is seen on the periphery of the lung tissue. You might have heard about the CT severity score, 11 by 25, 9 by 25, or 22 by 25. What is the CT severity score? Whole of the lung volume in both the lungs is given a percentage of 4%. Approximate, this is all approximate. And when we say that the CT severity score is 9 by 25, it would roughly mean that the patient's 36% of the lung volume has been affected by the ground glass opacities or the coronavirus infection. Why is it that the score of less than 9 is taken as the mild disease, and the score of 9 to 15 is taken as the moderate disease, and more than 16 is taken as the severe disease? Why is it that the score of score of 15 by 25 is taken as the moderate disease? Because the underlying lung tissue, this is the black lung tissue which you are seeing, has the normal aeration, and it is by virtue of this reserve that the patient can manage their oxygen levels, and this is called as a moderately severe score. But as the score advances to more than 16 by 25, this becomes a severe disease. Now coming on to the various investigations which might be required to the patients on home isolation. All the doctors want to know what are the various investigations which might be required. The investigations are basic. I don't want to go into the details of various investigations. There can be a number of investigations, but to homebound patients, CBC, CRP, D-dimer, LFT and KFT might suffice. One thing very, very important, though it is not a part of investigations, you please do not treat any patient in home isolation without oxygen monitoring. Oxygen monitoring by the pulse oximeter is essential in the disease. Why is it so? I'm going to come to it later on. And now I told you that there are basic investigations, CBC, CRP, D-dimer, LFT and KFT are the sufficient investigation in most of the patients on home isolation, which is the most important and most often forgotten investigation in most of the patients. It is the blood sugar. I also forgot to write blood sugar over here. Please do not forget to get a blood sugar level done. Why is it so? Because most of the patients are young patients these days particularly, and many of these patients will not have any history of diabetes. And if you ask them to get a blood sugar done, they might come up with the idea that they got executive health checkup done. They keep on checking their blood sugar. They never had diabetes. But once you check their sugar levels, you might find them high. Why is it so? Because the COVID-19 itself is a diabetogenic disease. It may cause inflammation of the islet cells of pancreas, giving rise to the impaired beta cell function and diabetes. The stress-induced hypoglycemia of the disease in itself can be diabetogenic. And thirdly, the steroid-induced hyperglycemia may add to the problem. So it is very, very important that the blood sugar levels of all the patients be monitored.
Kindly mute yourself, please. I request everyone to mute yourself. Dr. Poonam Pal, please mute yourself.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Investigations. How frequently should we repeat these investigations? The first set of investigation should be done on second to fourth day of illness for the baseline values. It is very important to understand that the initial investigations may not show any changes, but for the baseline values, we may have a baseline investigation done, CBC, CRP, LFT, KFT, and D-dimer. Later on 7th to 9th day of disease, as I said, the 7th to 9th day are very, very important because patients, they start suddenly deteriorating. What are the common findings in the various investigations? You have got the investigations done, but how do we interpret these investigations? CBC, you look for the leukopenia. More is the leukopenia, more severe is the disease likely to be. Lymphopenia, the virus basically has two components. One is it increases the inflammation. Secondly, virus attacks the lymphocytes, which are the primary cells, to mount an immune response. So virus has double properties. One is that increases the inflammation, which causes problems in the host, and secondly, it suppresses the immunity. And so you might see the leukopenia, you might see the lymphopenia, and a raised neutrophil lymphocyte ratio more than 3.3 can be a bad prognostic indicator and should alert the physician. And all these patients, they should be closely monitored. Presence of monocytes and presence of eosinophils are good prognostic indicators. Sometimes patients and the doctors, they get paranoid that the patient is having thrombocytopenia. They start looking for the other diagnostic clues, maybe the dengue or associated typhoid illness, but mild thrombocytopenia has been reported in about 20% patients with COVID virus disease. This is the chart which shows that as the age advances, the NLR ratio of more than 3.3 becomes much more important and the mortality increases. We were talking about the various findings in the various investigations, the CRP levels, the most commonly done test. It is very important that we convert all the values to the milligram per liter values, because most of the literature in India and abroad follows these values. Sometimes the labs report the milligram per deciliter, but here I'm taking the milligram per liter values, and most of the literature will take so. So it makes it easy for the comparison. Raised CRP levels on the day 2 to 4 indicate higher chances to develop serious illness. CRP on the 6th and 7th day of symptoms is a ominous sign, and a CRP of more than 70 milligrams per liter, even with a normal oxygen level, could be an indication of impending cytokine storm. Kindly remember this value of 70 milligram per liter, even with a normal oxygen saturation, could be an indication of impending cytokine storm. What are the other findings? One is the D-dimer. D-dimer values may be elevated at the baseline, especially in the old age. And if the baseline values of D-dimer are high, then they are likely to have a critical illness. It is also important to understand that D-dimer values are not done at the baseline or the 7th to 9th day of illness to guide you about the anticoagulant therapy. There is no correlation between the anticoagulation and the D-dimer values. D-dimer values may be very, very high in old age patients, and they may still not require any anticoagulation beyond 7 to 10 days of steroid treatment. In patients who have aged more than 50 years of age, then they should be, the D-dimer value should be adjusted according to the age. And the adjustment is very, very simple. If the patient's age is, say, 80, then the D-dimer value for normal for that patient is going to be at about 800. For 60, it is going to be 600. For a 70-year-old man, it is going to be 700. What about the LFT? LFT is usually not done by most of the physicians because everybody is hovering around CRP, D-dimer, IL-6. LFT is again commonly missed. LFT measurement is extremely important because nearly 60% of the patients, especially the obese patients, diabetics, they may have derangements in the LFT. SGOT and SGPT may rise normally in these patients, and the values may be nearly 100 or so. Very, very high values of LFT, SGOT, SGPT are not seen in the disease. This is very important because many of these times these patients are giving favipiravir. When the favipiravir is given in these patients, the favipiravir is a drug which is toxic to the liver, and the favipiravir should not be given if the values of D-dimer and the value, if the SGOT, SGPT are more than 100. And the remdesivir should not be given to these patients if the values of OTPT are more than 200 each. What about the LDH? LDH does not contribute to the therapeutic management in the early disease. An increase in the LDH by 62 units per liter has an acceptable sensitivity and high specificity for the disease progression. Normally the LDH values, they vary from 140 to 280. So because there is a lot of variation, 140 to nearly double 280. So it may be important for a person to have the baseline value in case you wish to use LDH for the further progression of disease. IL-6, a very important talk about the IL-6 is because the IL-6 was a very good test to pick up the cytokine syndrome, but the IL-6 has lost its value in the common day-to-day practice because the sample of the IL-6 should not be stored. A sample collection of the IL-6 has to be done in the EDTA vial, and the EDTA vial should be centrifuged at 1500 RPM for about half an hour, and the the plasma should be separated immediately. If the vial is allowed to stay, if the blood is allowed to stay for more than half an hour, the WBCs in the clot in the blood are likely to release further interleukins, and the interleukin levels may be disproportionately high and fallaciously wrong, and may not be able to guide the treating physician towards the management. And so not only this, not only the collection, the transportation is important. Important thing is that the lab should use the same method to do the IL-6 levels. If the method is changed by the laboratory, then the values may vary from method to method. So it is important that the patients, they should follow only one lab in the measurement of IL-6 over the progression of disease. You may kindly give me some time because there's a call and somebody is probably seems to be in distress. This was about the IL-6 values, and the follow-up sample should be sent to the same lab for the comparison. Cutoff value of 80 picogram per liter are indicative of cytokine shock syndrome. I told you that it is 70 for the CRP and it is 80 for the IL-6. What are the other common findings? The ferritin, many people get a ferritin value done. Ferritin is not very important lab investigation. Why is it that the ferritin is not very important lab investigation? Especially in the homebound cases, the ferritin may be a very important investigation in the ICU and other places because the ferritin values, if they are more than 2000 nanograms per ml, then it indicates a very severe disease. But the ferritin values, they are slow to rise and they are very slow to decline in the homebound cases or even in the ICU cases. So they may not be a very good investigation and they may not guide you to the management. But in ICU cases, they may be done. I request all of you not to be running after the ferritin values for the homebound management. Now coming on to the treatment, non-pharmacological investigation of inventory intervention and the pharmacological interventions. I'll be talking about the non-pharmacological interventions for reducing the mortality, which is really very important. Pharmacological interventions, large number of you people have already known and have you learned. And non-pharmacological interventions are basically oxygen therapy, awake proning, and prone ventilation. Oxygen therapy, very important part of it. You should all know what is oxygen therapy, how should it be given. What is first is the happy hypoxia. All these patients are known to be having happy hypoxia. This disease is very different from the other diseases because when you measure the oxygen saturation in these patients, you might find that their oxygen saturation is exceptionally low, but they are sitting very happily in the OPD. That it means that they tolerate the hypoxia pretty well. And in case of suppose a patient of pneumonia, ordinary bacterial pneumococcal pneumonia comes to the OPD, and if he has an oxygen saturation of 94%, he might be having breathlessness, he might not be able to sit comfortably, he would like to be gasping for oxygen. But these patients with the coronavirus infection, they might tolerate the hypoxia pretty well. That is the reason I told you in the beginning that please refuse to treat a patient of coronavirus without pulse oximeter. It is extremely important that all the patients, they should monitor their oxygen saturation at home with the help of a pulse oximeter. Luckily, the pulse oximeters are available at nearby chemists at all the places. Why is it so? Because the patient might be appearing absolutely hale and hearty, and he might be having a exceptionally low oxygen saturation, which might be life-threatening. And now coming in, when to start the oxygen therapy? Oxygen therapy should be starting in all the patients whenever the oxygen saturation falls to less than 94%. I'm repeating this sentence. Oxygen therapy should be started in all the patients whenever the oxygen saturation starts falling below 94% persistently. How do we start the oxygen? We can use a face mask, simple face mask, as you all see. In the night, the patient may use the nasal prongs. Sometimes we have to go, as the limitation with the face mask and the nasal prongs is that they can go up to the 10 liters of oxygen per minute. Sometimes we need to give a very high oxygen levels, which may be 15 to 20 to 60 liters per minute. This is the high flow nasal cannula, which basically uses a compressor to deliver high rates of oxygen saturation. High rates of oxygen per minute This is not only the high rate of oxygen delivery, but also they heat up the oxygen to 37 degrees centigrade and also humidify. Which is the best thing to be used, oxygen cylinder or the oxygen concentrator? Oxygen cylinder is always a better thing in case it is available, because the oxygen concentrators, many of the poor quality oxygen concentrators are available in the market. Though they claim that they might be delivering 90% oxygen, but actually they might be delivering only simple air or 29% of the oxygen at a higher level of oxygen delivery. Suppose they might be delivering about 90% of oxygen when the delivery of the oxygen is 1 liter per minute. But as you increase the oxygen delivery to 5 liters per minute, their oxygen delivery might be just dropping to say 28%, 30%, 35%. Another thing about the low flow oxygen, what we have seen in the previous few days in Delhi, that these patients, they somehow do wonderfully well on even low levels of oxygen. And I've seen number of patients who have been able to manage good life with even 1 to 2 liters of oxygen per minute, because the oxygen cylinders are not available. It is a very scarce resource and they are not getting a refill. Just to save the oxygen for a longer period of time, many of these patients, they switched on to 1 to 2 liters of per minute, and they saved their life wonderfully well, and they managed somehow, or they were able to pull through number of days, and they ultimately landed up with the oxygen saturation of 95%, 94%, 98%, of course with the steroid treatment and other management issues. If the patient is not able to maintain oxygen saturation even with the oxygenation at home, then you should advise them the prone positioning. This is the picture which shows the prone position, and it is important that the patient brings his both the hands in front, lies down on the belly, but it is important that the belly should not get compressed. In case the abdomen gets compressed, the patient becomes uncomfortable. And when the patient becomes uncomfortable, he might become breathless. So these patients, they should be advised to use good number of pillows below the legs, below the chest, and at the head, and take out their hands in front. Take a position on the side, this side, that side, half an hour to this side, half an hour to the left lateral side, and about 1 hour on the prone side, and try to take deep breaths. They can be allowed to take half an hour rest on the supine position in between. And if the patient is able to do prone positioning in about 16 to 18 hours per day, it can increase his oxygen level tremendously. This is the chart which shows that why does the prone position work? Because when the patient is lying down supine, it is the heart which is compressing on the lung, and it is the liver which is compressing on the lung. But when the patient lies prone, basically the posterior lobes, which are the major lobes of the lung, they become free and they are able to have a better oxygenation and perfusion. Pharmacological interventions in the SARS-CoV-2. Till now, I talked about the non-pharmacological interventions. Now coming on to the pharmacological interventions. Pharmacological interventions are important because patients do not become comfortable unless you give them some drug. Most of the patients, they do not need any drug. Why is it so that most of the patients would not need any drug? Because we do not have any effective antiviral drug till now. The two antiviral drugs which are available in the market, one is the ivermectin and second is the favipiravir. Ivermectin, there is some good data has come over the last few weeks, and we are still we have started believing in ivermectin. Ivermectin is given in the dose of 12 milligram per day for about 5 days. The exact dose is around 200 micrograms per kg per day, and the dose can be given to the children, to the adults, but the ivermectin should not be given to the pregnant and lactating women. Second is the favipiravir. Favipiravir, you all know that favipiravir is being used left and right, but I do not have any faith in favipiravir. There used to be a disease called as SARS-CoV-1, in which came a drug called as Tamiflu. Once you give Tamiflu to these patients, their fever subsided, they become clinically better, their cough went away, they did not go into the complication. But it is not so with the favipiravir. Despite taking favipiravir, the patients continue to have fever. Patients continue to slip into the pneumonia. They go into the ARDS. then how the favipiravir is working? But we are all still running behind the favipiravir. To my opinion, favipiravir is not a good drug. But those who are giving favipiravir or Feviflu, they should understand that the favipiravir is to be given only those patients who have a SGOT and SGPT less than 100. And secondly, the uric acid level should also be monitored with the favipiravir because the drug has a propensity to increase the uric acid levels. Now coming on to the anti-inflammatory drugs, which remain the major important management guidelines, which are the many anti-inflammatory drugs are steroids, baricitinib and tocilizumab, and anticoagulation, also the cornerstone of therapy, convalescent plasma, IVIG, hyperimmune serum, monoclonal antibodies. And in the homebound treatment, we have basically the steroids, antiviral drugs, and anticoagulation. And of course, monoclonal and anti-VDs are likely to come in India very soon. The Director General of India and the Drug Controller of India has given them emergency use authorization today only, and they are likely to land up in India. And Cipla Pharmaceuticals is likely to distribute the drug to the public. Now coming on to the steroids, and we all know the recovery trial, it is known to everybody. And it was found that this drug reduced the mortality. This is the only drug which has shown to reduce the mortality. People are running behind the remdesivir, but that has not been shown to reduce the mortality. Dexamethasone reduced the deaths by 1/3, nearly 30% mortality in ventilated patients, and by 1/5 in other patients receiving oxygen only. So 33% to 20% reduction in the mortality is a very sound figure. Who should be given steroids and when should these steroids be started? All the patients with oxygen saturation below 94% should be started on steroids irrespective of day of illness. All patients with oxygen saturation below 94% should be started on steroids irrespective of day of illness. If the symptoms, fever and cough, fever or cough, it means either fever or cough are persisting beyond 5 days, one may start inhalational budesonide given by nebulization or inhaler or with spacer at a dose of 800 microgram twice daily or more for 5 to 7 days. There are 2-3 words which are very important in this sentence. What is the nebulization? Previously, we used to say that the nebulization should not be done in patients with COVID, but these guidelines have changed. We are frequently using nebulization very safely in these patients. Patient is having persistent fever, no cough, start with budesonide nebulization. 800 micrograms per day, so twice a day, maybe 3 times a day, 4 times a day. Fairly safe drug. Even in the pregnant women, even in the lactating women, very safe drug because it is not absorbed systemically from the lungs. And if the patient is having cough, it has a wonderful improvement in the symptom. Patients who are on systemic corticosteroids, they are additionally benefited by giving budesonide inhalation. Patients with diabetes, they can be safely given budesonide inhalation. Budesonide is available in 2 strengths. One is 0.5 milligram per 2 ml, and then another is 1 milligram per 2 ml. Whichever is available, because there is scarcity of the drug in the market. Whichever is available, go ahead with the nebulization, because nebulization, you do not tend to inhale the entire drug, and it depends upon how fast the drug vaporizes in the air and how far you are able to inhale. So the drug, the dose of 800 microgram may not be very, very practical. Now coming on to the steroids again, a steroid, if the symptoms, persistent fever, cough, worsening of myalgia, weakness, all these things, persistent fever, worsening of cough, myalgia, and weakness. Weakness is very important. Suggestive of hyperinflammation persists beyond 7 days. The treating doctor may decide to add on treatment with the low dose steroids, oral steroids, either methylprednisolone 4 to 8 milligram twice a day or prednisolone 5 to 10 milligram per day. Treating physician may also choose to start the oral steroid if the patient complains of sudden increasing weakness associated with the high levels of CRP in the second week of illness. Second week of illness, patient complaining of weakness, sudden weakness. What is sudden weakness? It is always very important to quantify the sudden weakness. What are the symptoms of cytokine storm? Cytokine storm generally occurs in the second week of illness. What are the symptoms? One is the persistently, sudden patient had become all right, there was no fever, patient was comfortable. Suddenly, 7th day onward, the patient started feeling weak. Weak to the extent that he or she feels that she's not able to go to the toilet. She keeps on lying down in the bed. She does not want to go to the toilet. She feels breathless. This is a sign of weakness. The fever, the peak has suddenly started coming up after 7 days. Or there is sudden increase in the level of CRP in the second week of illness. These are the signs of impending cytokine storm. And please do not hesitate to start steroids, oral, IM or IV, whatever is available to these patients on the very night of the symptoms. Do not wait for the next day. This might become catastrophic. These patients might suddenly deteriorate, may worsen up badly. Always important to start steroids in time. Kindly be bold. Do not go with the idea that the steroids cannot be started. But please be careful in starting steroids less than 5 days of illness unless the patient's oxygen saturation is dropping down. Which steroid to start? Dexamethasone sodium phosphate. There is some controversy about the 6 milligram or 8 milligram because the dexamethasone trial, recovery trial was done with the 6 milligram. I may clarify that this dexamethasone sodium phosphate 8 milligram is equal to dexamethasone 6 milligram. Kindly note it down. Many people have been giving the 6 milligram tablet. No. Kindly give 8 milligram tablet of dexamethasone sodium phosphate because there is no tablet of pure dexamethasone which is available. So this can be given orally, this can be given IV, this can be given IM per day. It can be given twice a day if the patient is in advanced stage of illness and the patient is having hypoxia. In the early stage, around 7 days or even earlier than that, this can be given orally. And the equivalent dose for the methylprednisolone is 16 milligram twice a day, 16 milligram twice a day. And for the prednisolone, it is 20 milligram twice a day, that is 40 milligram per day. Oral versus IV, which should be used? If the patient does not have repeated vomiting, there are no malabsorption issues, the oral drugs, they work equally well. Dexamethasone is preferred by me because it's a tried, tested, affordable and easily available drug, but the 8 milligram tablet may not be available. The tablet of Dexona, which is usually available in the market, is 0.5 milligram tablet. Kindly see that it is 0.5 milligram, then you calculate the number of tablets according to the dose required. Just do not undertake, mistake the 8 milligram into 0.5 milligram. Secondly, methylprednisolone can be given IV or orally because most of the patients are homebound patients. Orally, the tablets work as fine. Methylprednisolone has not been shown to offer any significant advantage over the dexamethasone except in short trials, but all the corporate hospitals, they have a fancy towards using the methylprednisolone for the reasons best known to them. As the disease advances, the doses may not remain the same. And the ICU people, they have started using the very, very high doses, say up to 240 milligrams of methylprednisolone, or maybe even more in very sick patients. What are the precautions that should always be taken when we are giving steroids? Blood sugar level should always be measured in those patients, even in those patients who do not have any previous history of diabetes, because as I said, COVID itself is a diabetogenic disease. Stress of the disease coupled with the steroids can lead to the hyperglycemia. Watch for the secondary bacterial infection or the fungal infections. In case the blood sugar levels rise, what should we do? Very important. Do not get panicky in case the blood sugar levels have risen. Kindly emphasize on the patient that they should monitor their blood sugar levels. In case the blood sugar levels rise, usually the blood sugar levels in non-diabetic people will rise to say not more than 200 milligram percent. And these patients, they can be very safely given vildagliptin along with the metformin. Vildagliptin tablets are available as Galvus M or Galvus Met or Java M or Verifica. There are multiple names. And you can very safely, even a general physician can very safely start these tablets. They are not going to bring down the blood sugar levels to drastically low levels. They are very, very safe tablets, and they can fairly well manage the blood sugar levels. Avoid the SGLT2 inhibitors like dapagliflozin or sulfonylureas like limepiride, because these are drugs which can suddenly give rise to good amount of hypoglycemia in these patients who at times may not take good meals. How long should the steroids be given? About 5 to 10 days. There is no need to taper steroids after a small course of 5 days. In those patients who have the higher disease or the higher severity of disease or the persistent hypoxia, these patients, they may be offered a slightly longer duration of steroids, maybe in the tapering dose. Very important slides. What are the contraindications of steroids? Steroids should be strictly avoided in asymptomatic people. Mild symptoms less than 7 days. CT score less than 8 with a disease duration of less than 5 to 7 days, because these are the viremia phase, high fever with a normal CRP values. CRP is an indicator of inflammation. If the CRP levels are normal without steroids, it means the patient is still in viremia phase. If the CRP levels are increasing and there is no other cause of increasing the CRP, then one may feel that the patient is in the hyperinflammation phase. And these days, in the second wave of the coronavirus, we have been witnessing that large amount of the patients, they have been slipping into the hypoxia even earlier 7 days. So I always request all the physicians to have a slightly low threshold with caution in patients of the hyperinflammation, especially those who have recurrent fever, who have high degree of cough, or who have profound weakness. In these patients, if you are in doubt that the patient may be having a cytokine storm or not, one may request the patient to take a small walk of 5 minutes in their room and measure the oxygen saturation before starting the walk while in the sitting posture, and about 5 to 6 minutes after the walk. And these patients, they show a oxygen drop of about 4%. Then the oxygen saturation drops to below 94%. Then these patients, they should be immediately started oxygen. They should be immediately started with the steroids. Patients, they tend to tell you about the oxygen saturation, which is slightly higher, because they fear that they might be going into a serious disease. But the physician should try to elicit the lowest possible reading of oxygen saturation, which is persistently present. Patients having persistent cough, and if they measure their oxygen saturation immediately after the cough, may report a fallaciously low level of oxygen saturation, which should be discarded by the treating physician. What about the anticoagulation? A very, very important slide. I get a lot of queries. Should we start the anticoagulation? The D-dimer is very high, 2000. We want to start. Sir, can we start the anticoagulation? No, no. D-dimers do not guide you to the anticoagulation. All those patients who require steroids, they should be started on low molecular weight heparin, 40 to 60 milligram once in a day. If the low molecular weight heparin cannot be given in the home isolation, then the patients, they can be safely started on the newer anticoagulants, that is the rivaroxaban, which is 15 milligram per day, or the apixaban, which is given twice a day, 2.5 milligram. And these drugs are fairly good enough. Many times, many of the time our doctor colleagues, they want to know whether the PT levels or ABTT levels, they should be measured with these drugs. No, these are fairly safe drugs. They do not require the measurement of PT or APTTK along with this therapy. Same way, the low molecular weight heparin is a fairly safe therapy in these patients. A word about remdesivir. What is the place of remdesivir in the treatment? Those patients who go into ICU early, that is 7th, 8th day of illness, and they are requiring about say 5 to 10 liters of oxygen per day. These are the patients who might benefit with remdesivir. Remdesivir, if it is given late, may not have any benefit. A word about tocilizumab. Tocilizumab is for those patients who continue to have raised IL-6 levels and require higher degree of oxygen saturation, higher degree of oxygen, say about 15 liters per minute, 30 liters per minute, 20 liters per minute, and they have persistently high levels of IL-6, then these patients, they should be given tocilizumab. Kindly do not venture into tocilizumab or remdesivir at home. And tocilizumab is a fairly dangerous drug because it suppresses the immunity very profoundly and can lead to certain superadded infection, which can be life-threatening, including the fungal infections and the bacterial infection. Monoclonal antibodies, number of very fancy names, Bamlanimab, even I can't remember these names. A cocktail of monoclonal antibodies have been approved by the drug controller of India today, and they are likely to be available in India. They are to be used in the early phase of disease, and the monoclonal antibodies were given to President Trump also. They are to be used in the viremia phase. These are the drugs which may change the natural history of COVID-19. Blaze study confirmed that mild to moderate, I'm saying mild to moderate, COVID-19, 70% reduction in the hospitalization or death by day 29. That and on long-term use, the drugs, the monoclonal antibodies have been found to be effective, but in the early days, and that is the viremia phase, because these are antibodies, they are basically going to attack the virus. They are not going to change the inflammation. So they are to be used early in the viremia phase. When the drug is still not available, they might be available. And why do we have monoclonal antibodies in polyclonal form? I'm using two different words. Monoclonal antibodies in polyclonal forms. Yani this is a cocktail of multiple monoclonal antibodies. The cocktail of multiple balaminibab or astaminibab. Why so many monoclonal antibodies in the cocktail? Because if only one monoclonal antibody is given, then the other antigens from the coronavirus, they escape and they cause the disease. So a cocktail of monoclonal antibodies is given. Regeneron and the Lilly are the two companies which are marketing these antibodies. They are likely to be available in India soon through Cipla Pharmaceuticals. And finally, this is the message. Steroids are not to be used in all the patients, but please remember that the steroids are not a poison. Have the right time to use the steroids. Initially, it is the budesonide inhalation. Secondly, it may be the low dose. And thirdly, those patients who have the hypoxia, they should be given the full dose. Ivermectin, good data is coming for the ivermectin, and the minimum pharmacological interventions are to be done in those patients who have clinically stable disease. High risk patients, those who have diabetes, obesity, should be carefully monitored, and physicians should have low threshold to start steroids in these patients. And with the starting of steroids and the oxygen therapy, we have been able to witness a good decrease in the mortality in the coronavirus patients. Thank you very much. And before I end my talk, long COVID symptoms, good number of patients of coronavirus disease, they might continue to forward the doctor with the complaints of persistent fever, fatigue, and these patients, they need to be assured, and especially once the disease has improved, they might complain of dyspnea, joint pains, headache, rhinitis, red eyes, number of symptoms. These patients, they need to be reassured and they should be asked to take rest. And the patients who do not take rest, they might feel that the disease has gone. This day, suddenly the patient undergoes a strenuous activity. He lands up with a fever and becomes panicky again. These patients should be reassured and they should be advised to take good rest and good diet, good foods, hydration, and all these things. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for your enlightening talk. I think every sentence was a pearl of wisdom to just against COVID-19 disease. I think now the IMA members, irrespective of their specialities, will be constantly treating their relatives and people around them with confidence. So any questions are welcome. So one question is there in the chat box. Uh, Please elaborate on the role of aspirin in anticoagulation therapy, sir.
A thing which I wanted to avoid. Aspirin therapy has been used in USA very frequently, and the platelets are in the overdrive state. And if the aspirin in the low dose is used, of 75 microgram, there are a good number of studies which say that it decreases the severity of disease, and these patients, they have a better outcome. So there is no harm in using the drug, provided patients they tolerate it well. Those patients of heart disease or the vascular disorders who are already on the antiplatelet agent, they should continue to use the drug.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I wanted to ask one question, sir. As you pointed out that the oxygen saturation measurement is very important. Sir, I just want to know that some people normally do have less oxygen saturation, as like people who are obese, or people who, they have sleep apneas and all. So any other situations, sir, where the people normally do have less oxygen saturation and we need not to panic?
No,
They have-
that is a very important question you have raised. Patients with obesity do not have low oxygen saturation. Patients with sleep apnea syndrome do not have low oxygen saturation. In the world of today, if the patient has not been having any respiratory disorder in the past, like COPD, bronchial asthma, advanced stage of bronchial asthma, not ordinary bronchial asthma, and the patient has not been having any lung compromise in the past, then any hypoxia less than 94% should be taken as diagnostic of COVID disease in the current scenario. One should be really very, very watchful. If the patient is having hypoxia, kindly presume that the patient is in the second stage of COVID-19. I may tell you my personal case. My mother-in-law, a patient of Alzheimer's disease, living home, no symptoms absolutely. And one day the oxygen saturation was measured, it was found to be 94%. It made me cautious, it made me alert. Immediately I started on steroids. I did not even wait for the COVID RT-PCR report. Family members were not even willing to get a COVID RT-PCR report. No, nothing doing, this is COVID. If a patient in the current scenario, without COPD, without interstitial lung disease, without severe lung disorder in the past, has hypoxia, take it as COVID.
There's a question that patients who are having menstruation, can they be given enoxaparin? Dr. Ritu Jain has asked this
Sure,
question.
there is no harm. There is no bar to giving enoxaparin. Enoxaparin is a very safe drug, and they can be very safely given.
So can the aspirin replace the newer oral anticoagulants?
What is the question?
Dr. Sanjay has asked this question.
What is the question? I did not understand.
Can aspirin replace newer?
No. There are two things. One is the platelets, and second is the coagulation disorder. Platelets, they control the bleeding. Platelets, they form the platelet plug. And the clotting is one thing which is a different pathway altogether. You may give them together, but one may not replace the other.
So which anticoagulant orally can be used in OPD, and when sir has told, but which can be
No
used?
issues. Rivaroxaban, Rivoban, R-I-V-O-B-A-N, Rivoban. I repeat the name, R-I-V-O-B-A-N, Rivaroxaban. Rivoban is one trade name. Xarelto, X-A-R-E-L-T-O, Xarelto. 15 milligram once in a day to be given to all the patients who have hypoxia.
Dr. Sanjay Kumar Agrawal, sir, you can ask the question.
Or even the patients, they can be given apixaban, which is Equulis, EQUILIS, 2.5 milligram twice a day.
Sir, what about dapagliflozin and other newer one?
Which one?
Dabigatran, Debistar and other.
Dabigatran also can be used. I have not used them many times. They can be safely used.
So people are asking about the IVIG.
Off-label. Because my talk basically I've restricted to the homebound management, so I've not gone into the details about the IVIG and all these things. They are not to be used in home. Even in the ICUs, they are being used as off-label therapy. There have not been much trials, and whatever the trials have occurred, they have not shown a significant mortality benefit. Because this is a situation where nothing is left and the patient is in ICU, deteriorating day by day. The attendants say that what you are doing.
Sir, we are running a helpline lecture line also. उसमें बहुत सारे क्वेश्चन जो आ रहे हैं वो ये है कि लोगों का वैक्सीन फर्स्ट डोज लग गया है, in between they got a COVID, so how long they have to wait for second dose of vaccine, whether it should be on scheduled time or it has to be delayed?
The vaccination of the second dose has to be not before 2 weeks after the complete recovery from the disease. Those who have had the Covishield, they have a fair good amount of time because they can extend their vaccination, say about 12 weeks, up to the 12 weeks from the first dose. Those who have taken the vaccine as the Covaxin, they can also safely prolong the next dose because the COVID in itself acts as a booster. So there be no hurry, let there be no hurry. Those patients, if the patient has recovered completely well and 2 weeks have lapsed, many of the people might say that 4 to 6 weeks, fairly good enough. Because the word complete recovery, inverted commas, complete recovery is very important. If a patient is having mild fever, mild malaise and all these things, it's not a complete recovery. So I tell my patients that if you are fine, comfortably well, go ahead for the vaccination 2 weeks after the recovery. If you are not well, kindly wait for 4 to 6 weeks. And most of the patients having gone through a moderately severe disease would like to wait for 4 to 6 weeks. Those who had a mild disease would like to go for the vaccination immediately 2 weeks later.
Sir, one last question, sir. What should be a prescription after 14 days of complete recovery? Patient is coming to you and with mild weakness and other long COVID syndrome like symptom. Whether we have to give something or we have just to give him assurance and physiotherapy and other things.
I was in 4th year and Viva for the forensic medicine was going on. And the question was asked by the examiner, in case the snake bites, what will you do? The examinee answered, sir, I will reassure the patient. Examiner kept silent. Again, sir, I'll reassure the patient. आगे बोलो भाई.
Thank you, sir.
I'll reassure the patient.
Sir, one more question, sir. What are
So
your
kindly listen to me. The examiner said, you have already reassured the patient thrice. Now the treatment. The treatment is that these patients, they should be reassured that they are not likely to go into a very serious kind of illness in times to come. But they should continue to take good amount of rest every day, in the night as well as in the day. They should have good amount of hydration, vitamin C, fruits, good amount of high protein diet. And they, in case they have been on diet or they have been on anti-diabetic medication, they should optimize their therapy and they should follow the precautions as they were following the disease. And they must be cautioned that they might have some myalgia, some fever in times to come, and they should not really worry about it. Many patients are worried because they have a fever of 99 degrees centigrade, 99 degree Fahrenheit. This 99 degree Fahrenheit is mainly because of raised PMR and is not because of the disease per se. But some patients may have persistent fever and the spikes of fever may come in. So they should be maintained with the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory on a SOS basis. These patients may continue to be given as vitamin C, zinc, and all those things. But the steroids and antibiotics may not be necessarily prescribed.
Role of antibiotics, azithromycin and doxycycline.
No role. Even I give it because these drugs they have like known to be effective against the atypical pathogens in the throat, and for the sore throat or the antibiotic coverage they may be used, but they do not have any effect on the virus.
So your views
Sir, is there a
on
role of meditation and
breakthrough-
yoga in this management of this COVID thing?
I didn't get the question.
Is there any role of meditation and yoga in this management of this COVID management?
Definitely, lot of role of management, a lot of role of meditation, because they are stress relievers, and those patients who can perform yogic exercises without any hassle, they must do it at home.
Thank you, sir.
Sir, your views on breakthrough COVID, sir. I have seen like those people who are going for vaccination, they're getting COVID after some days.
Yes, some people are getting.
Sir,
We
your
don't
views
know.
on it,
We do not know. We do not know whether it is vaccine related or they got exposed during the process of vaccination, because there is a good amount of crowd and the COVID appropriate behavior cannot be maintained in these centers. And most of the people are saying that this is the virus which is a killed virus and should not give rise to the COVID, but whether the proteins which are being formed, the spike proteins, whether they have the capability to induce COVID-like symptoms or the COVID-like inflammation is yet to be proved. But the current scenario, no government is going to take up this project. And still, we do not wish to dissuade people from vaccination, because those countries who have taken vaccination on a large scale, they are now falling free of COVID disease. Israel is one country which is nearly free from COVID now, and another country is the UAE, which has like vaccinated more than 66% of its population. The USA, which used to have good number of cases previously, now coming to a plateau. So vaccination, the importance of vaccination cannot be undermined. But nevertheless, those people who have had the COVID post-vaccination should be investigated fairly. But in this current scenario, it is not possible. Probably those who are developing COVID are basically sacrificial lambs for the benefit of millions of people.
Alok sir, you can ask your question and vote of thanks by you.
So my question is regarding the prophylactic role of ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Is there any role? If yes, what are the dosage?
Hydroxychloroquine has been a disease-modifying agent and has been dumped by the world even as the prophylactic treatment. The All India Institute of Medical Sciences and the ICMR, they still continue to propagate the drug. The ivermectin, the government of Uttar Pradesh has been using it in the prophylactic doses. You must be knowing more than me. I really do not advocate this therapy, and I would love to know from you what doses the government of Uttar Pradesh is advocating.
So we want an expert opinion. Is it useful? Then we should be thinking about it. If it is not useful, then there is no point
You may continue to use ivermectin, but I have not been like seeing people. I have not been advising people to go for the prophylactic use of ivermectin.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Ritujan sir has asked the role of colchicine.
Colchicine or anti-inflammatory drugs like Meftal and all these things, they can be used in the early phase. They may have some anti-inflammatory role. The colchicine is very popular in Maharashtra, but in Delhi and around, this is not very popular. I've not used it much in my patients. I prefer to use Meftal, Nimesulide, or Naproxen or Piroxicam in my patients who are not having decrease in the spikes of fever in the early days.
VP Jindal sir.
Thank you sir for coming for this. हम लोगों का एक प्रयास था कि सारे के सारे डॉक्टर आप अपनी स्पेशलिटी छोड़ के कोविड स्पेशलिस्ट हो जाएं. एटलीस्ट L1 और L2 केसेस के लिए शायद मेरे ख्याल से लोगों के लिए आपने बहुत ही क्रिस्प एंड क्लियर मैसेज दिया कि हमें क्या करना है क्या नहीं करना है. और सर आई विल लाइक टू थैंक यू अगेन कि हमारे शॉर्ट नोटिस पे आपने इतना अच्छा हम लोगों के लिए किया. हम लोग प्लान कर रहे हैं कि सब डॉक्टर्स के ट्रेनिंग के लिए हम वीकली अपडेट एक रखें, तो शायद लोगों का अपडेट भी होता जाएगा. इट इज एवर चेंजिंग साइंस जो प्रोटोकॉल कितनी बार बदल चुका है एक साल के अंदर अंदर. STQ has been dumped and ivermectin has come, which is in one state only of India, UP, and many things are changing daily basis. जैसे cocktail of monoclonal antibody will come now in picture. So we have to update ourselves. We are planning कि इतनी सारी query अभी बाकी हैं, but everything has to be come to an end. It was a very good lecture. Thanks sir once again.
You're
We
welcome.
may-
Thank you very much again, once again.
We may give you trouble again. Are you sir available for video consultation? Many people are asking.
I'm available on video for video consultation 9810148550.
So chat box में नंबर एक बार कर देंगे तो
98101 sir, please मुझे बता दीजिए. I will float sir. 98101
48
48.
550.
Okay sir.
You kindly tell the procedure, because large number of people they keep calling, and my procedure is that the patient, they should give their history and all the relevant information on the WhatsApp, and they should wait for my call. Whenever I'm free, I may be calling them myself and give them a audio consultation, prescription based consultation, or if required video consultation, because they might have to wait for some time, because in the day we have to see our patients also. And the patient, they should not expect a 24 hours message service, or they have to maintain a very high morale for themselves, because large number of people, they require help. And having paid the consultation once should not mean that the services have been hired 24/7.
Thank you very much sir.
Thank you
सुभाष
sir.
जी, आप कुछ बोलना चाहेंगे सर? सुभाष सर? Sir, he is a chairperson of our COVID task force, Dr. Subhash Agrawal sir.
Thank
And
you, Dr. Vani.
IMA president also. Sir, over to you, Subhash sir.
थैंक यू डॉक्टर वानी. डॉक्टर एस के गुप्ता ने बहुत ही अच्छा मतलब आज अपने को एनलाइटन किया, और मैं समझ रहा हूँ कि हमने जितने भी हमारे मेंबर यहाँ बैठे हुए हैं सारे सुन रहे हैं, और हम लोगों के लिए स्पेसिफिकली फैमिली फिजिशियंस और जनरल फिजिशियंस के लिए डेफिनेटली इट वाज ए नाइस टॉक. और बहुत सारे कन्फ्यूजन और बहुत सारी जो स्पेसिफिकली स्टेरॉइड को लेके जो एक कन्फ्यूजन रहता है कि व्हेन वी हैव टू स्टार्ट और कितना करना है कितना नहीं करना एक एंटीकोगुलेंट थेरेपी के लिए, डेफिनेटली इट वाज वेरी एनलाइटिंग. और मुझे लगता है कि इससे हमारी जो हम होम आइसोलेशन वाले हमारे पेशेंट्स हैं, हम उनको ठीक से ट्रीट कर पाएंगे. जैसे कि आपने कहा L1 L2 के लिए हमारे जो अगर मेंबर्स हैं जितने भी, और डेली हमारे पास क्वेरीज भी आती हैं और पेशेंट्स भी हम सारे के सारे. और इन दिनों तो मैं तो बल्कि पिछले 10 दिन से केवल टेली कंसल्टेशन ही कर रहा हूँ, क्योंकि बीच में तो हम देख रहे थे पेशेंट, लेकिन अब लास्ट 10 डेज से तो केवल आई एम डूइंग टेली कंसल्टेशन. तो डेफिनेटली दिस टॉक वाज वेरी एनलाइटिंग फॉर all of us. Thank you, Dr. S.K. Gupta. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And looking forward to see you again to update us, sir. हम आपको परेशान